are talking about these kings of Babylonia, of the Babylon Empire. And the movie is Journey to Bethlehem. So I don't know how many of y'all have seen it. It's a musical about the birth of Jesus that has a lot of things wrong in it. That's why I don't necessarily recommend it. The songs are okay. But
my grandkids sing them all.
Yes, they do. But the one song that I really liked because of what they've done, it's King Herod, and he sings about how it's great to be a king. But one thing he does is a riff on the Lord's Prayer, or at least the King James Version of the Lord's Prayer. We won't get into that. But that in the King James it ends, "For thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory." And this musical has Herod singing, "For mine is the kingdom, mine is the power, mine is the glory." And I thought that was kind of actually a pretty good riff upon, because that's really, when it comes down to whether it's a king or whether it's one of us, that's really the question. Who has the authority in your life? Whose kingdom is it? Whose glory is it? Whose power is it? Is it God's? In which case it's thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory. Or is it mine? And that's really, to me, a lot about what we're talking about here, especially in these chapters that we talked about last week and the chapters we talked about this week. For those of you who tried to watch this online, or maybe you're watching online right now, don't be surprised if it freezes on you. We have an issue that we're working on, just so you know. The problem is when all of us are opening up our Bibles on our phones, that's competing with us trying to stream the classes. And it's the phones beat out the streaming. And so that's why the streaming has been freezing on you here recently if you've been trying to watch your phone. We're gonna be splitting the streaming and having the streaming be on a different Wi-Fi service from the phone use here, and so hopefully that will take care of the problem. But if that's been an issue for you, I'm sorry. We're trying to address it. And so let's now turn to chapter 5. And what is the story in chapter 5? What are we looking at? Who are we talking about? It's a fairly well-known chapter, should be for all of us, because it's certainly one we teach our kids.
Belshazzar's party.
Belshazzar's party, all right?
Vessels from the temple.
Using vessels from the temple as a part of his party, all right?
Handwriting on the wall.
Handwriting on the wall, and what is the handwrite? Depends how you want to pronounce it. I pronounce it meanie tekel upharsin, but since I don't really speak Babylonian or Aramaic or Hebrew, it doesn't really matter how you pronounce them. And who is the one person who can interpret the handwriting on the wall? Daniel. Well, God, correct. And he uses Daniel as his mechanism to interpret it. All right. So let's dig a little deeper into this. And there are a lot of people who point to this chapter as a place where the history is wrong, as to why they therefore maintain it was written in the 200s and they just didn't really know all the history. And the reason they say the history's wrong is technically when Babylon falls, the king is not Belshazzar, the king is Nabonidus, who is the son of Nebuchadnezzar. Now, does that mean Daniel 5 is wrong? The answer is no, because Belshazzar is Nabonidus' son, and because it is such a big kingdom, empire, and because Nabonidus was out fighting lots of wars, for the last 11 years of his time as the head of the Babylonian Empire, he is not in Babylon, and he has left his son Belshazzar in Babylon to deal with local issues. And so, and it's interesting, because so notice, what does Belshazzar promise to his sorcerers, astrologers, seers? What does he promise to them, and then what does he promise the same thing to Daniel? And you'll notice it's weird, you go, oh, why does he do that? But it makes perfect sense when you sit there and go, number one is Nabonidus, number two is Belshazzar. So what does he promise?
Their third kingdom.
They'll be the third person in the kingdom, because he couldn't promise one or two. And so it makes perfect sense, and it doesn't, there's nothing unhistorical about this section, but just so you know, that is something people who are looking to find problems are going to point out. Okay. So now it's weird. So anybody know the history of how Babylon falls? Right, Scott.
The Persians besieged it, and they diverted the river around it and came into the creek bed.
Okay. So interestingly enough, they're being sieged. They're being surrounded. The very night that this happens, he's having his party. And you're like going, obviously he felt comfortable in the city that Nebuchadnezzar had built, and felt comfortable that he could have this party, and obviously wasn't paying any attention to what might be happening to the river. Jan, you were giving me is there something? Okay, all right. I was getting a stare. Oh, that's okay. Sometimes I have to check. There's certain people I check on, and I did not get Kay's one of those. When she gives me, I have to kind of check with her to make sure I didn't say something that was wrong. He, on this very night, and it appears because he makes a really stupid choice, and the really stupid choice is, hey, we got those vessels, they're just, they're collecting dust, we could use them for something better, that'd be a great thing to drink wine out of. And he has the vessels brought, and he uses them to toast his own gods. And it's interesting how Daniel makes it clear they're toasting gods of stone and wood and metal that can't do a thing. But because of this, a hand appears and writes upon the wall, Mene, Mene, Tekel, Upharsin. And a couple of interesting things here. One, what's the impact on this mighty king who is so confident in himself he can be throwing a party when his city's being besieged? What's the impact upon him when he sees this hand writing on the wall?
Frightened.
Scared. His knees are not, they're knocking together. That's frightening. That's what they do in the cartoons, right? They have the knees knocking together. He is frightened.
Physically, his color changes. His color changes.
Whatever you would think of that somebody exhibiting fright, he exhibits it. And he calls for all of his wives, reminds him of Daniel, the queen. Now, this is probably not his wife. A couple of reasons for that. One, it's already said that his wives and concubines were at this big party. and this queen comes in from off stage. 2, it appears that all of his contemporaries don't really know the history. Why they don't, who knows, but they don't know, or they've discounted the history about Daniel. But she, and so this would be Nabonidus' wife, Nebuchadnezzar's daughter-in-law, she, and the mother of Belshazzar, she knows and remembers Daniel and knows his God will interpret this dream for you. Okay. So he calls Daniel, and Daniel comes, and Daniel interprets the dream. Now, what does Daniel tell him before he interprets the dream?
Yes, we want the gifts.
Okay, number 1, giving me these gifts I don't care about, which is probably not a bad idea, since who wants to be number 3 in the kingdom when the kingdom is about to fall? Now, but really it's more, that's Daniel's character, that he's not doing it because of these wonderful gifts that are being offered up. Okay, so that's number 1, he says, I don't want the gifts. What else does he say?
Reminds him what happened to Nebuchadnezzar.
Okay. Reminds him, he goes, you should know. Now, again, this is some things that throw people off. It keeps calling Nebuchadnezzar his father. Now, technically, Nebuchadnezzar is not his father. Nebuchadnezzar is his grandfather. Does that cause anybody in here a problem?
No.
Right? Why not?
They called Moses and Abraham their father.
Okay. Abraham was their father, even though he might have been their grandfather, their great-great-grandfather, their great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfather, but he was still called Father Abraham. And it's the same thing here. Whoever, clearly Nebuchadnezzar was one of the great kings of the Babylon Empire, and clearly in this lineage of kings, Nebuchadnezzar, Nabonidus, Belshazzar, he is the greatest. So of course you would reference him as your father, and everybody would have understood they're referencing his grandfather, but in all ways he is the father of the nation, just like we call George Washington our father, and he's not even my father in any way, shape, or form that I'm aware of. Maybe I should check with the DAR, but anyway. He reminds them, and what specifically does he remind? Does he remind him about how I had interpreted your grandfather's dream? Is that what he reminds him about?
God sent him out to graze.
Okay. He reminds him when God had humbled his grandfather, when he was without his mind, when he was just like an animal, when they fed him like oxen, when his hair grew, when his nails grew, when he had no right mind for 7 seasons. And why would that be what he would remind Belshazzar about?
Same thing is happening here, pretty much.
Okay.
Same thing.
He is going to be humbled as well, and for a similar reason, because you have set yourself up as God in deciding how to use God's special holy things. Just like your grandfather set himself up as God in saying, what a wonderful city that I have created, with no reference whatsoever to the fact that God had put him in power. Because you didn't learn the same lesson that your grandfather didn't learn, there will be consequences. All right? And so, meeny, meeny, tekel, upharsin. With an interesting sidelight, all 3 of these words have lots of meanings, but all 3 of these words are actually weight words. Kind of like if I were to say something like pound, ounce, ton. So they all have a weight sense to them. Now they also have other senses to them, and it's kind of the play between the weightiness. So he is he is pronouncing a judgment. He is placing a weight upon Belshazzar and his nation. So it's ironic he's using weight terms for that, but those terms also have other meanings, or which again is not unusual. Lots of words have several meanings. So meaning means what? As Daniel says, as he interprets. All right, means you've been numbered. All right, and tekel says what?
Weighed.
You've been weighed in the balances. And now, let's go back. Meaning doesn't just mean he's numbered you, right? There's more to that. What does it mean by saying you've been numbered?
Your days are numbered.
All right, your days are numbered
And brought to
and brought to an end. Basically saying this is, whereas at that time, maybe people lived 70, 80 years, doesn't matter, found not to measure up. You have been found to be wanting. You do not have the characteristics that God wants in a king, and it is time for your kingdom to be over. Okay? And then Upharsin means, huh?
Divided, your kingdom will be divided.
Okay.
Into Medes and Persians.
All right. And again, it's interesting. You is and. Farson is again a weight term, but it also obviously is connected with, what does it even sound like? Persia. Persian, Farson. There's a very close connection. And so, again, using a weight term to say that we've divided your kingdom, meaning your kingdom is going to be taken away from you, or divided between the Medes and the Persians. Either way, it is interesting. What is Belshazzar's response?
Still wants to give the gifts.
Right. Here, I told you I'd give you the gifts. You interpreted the dream. And so he gives them the chain of gold and the cloth of purple and proclaimed that he's third ruler in the kingdom. And that very night, Belshazzar, king of the Chaldeans, is slain, and Darius the Mede received the kingdom. Okay. So that is, in a nutshell, chapter 5. Any thoughts, questions, concerns? Yes, Scott?
I think when Daniel's brought before Belshazzar, and he tells him the story about Nebuchadnezzar, he adds that, and you knew all of this. So he's kind of...
But obviously he didn't know who Daniel was. So I think probably implied there is either you knew, you at least knew your grandfather was out of his mind for a period of time, and the kingdom was taken away from him. And your grandfather himself said it was because God in heaven did it. And even if all that's slipped your mind, and you've forgotten who Daniel is, and you need somebody else who's older to remind you, even if all that's true, it doesn't matter. You should have known. So whether you actually did know or you should have known, it's the same thing. You're not going to get a pass because there's been plenty of information you should have had available to you that should have driven how you ran this kingdom, especially at this crucial juncture when you're being besieged. And yet, you're partying, you're calling on gods that are no better than stone and wood, and you are actually thumbing your nose at the God of heaven who actually has control over whether you're going to remain in control or not. Okay. And that, yes.
John,
Vicky.
was it customary
is that, now again, I say this, but I have to be careful. Because you're sitting there going, how many times did the Jews lose?
Well, yes.
I mean, so over time, you know, we forgot about the law, and it has to be discovered in the temple. But on the other hand, I think that usually is a gradual thing, although, you know, Joshua and Judges, it's like it takes one generation, and they've forgotten who is in control. So obviously, you know, and Rehoboam doesn't
Same thing.
do what, you know, his smart father Solomon would have done. He instead listens to his boneheaded friends. But on the other hand, just think about it. Especially because you're sitting there going, this is his lineage, you know. So do I think he knew all the great things about his grandfather? Yes, I do. Now, is it possible they, as they would be wont to do, that they didn't emphasize the tough things that happened and the time, you know, they didn't generally put that in their pedestals and their statues and their decrees. But you're sitting there going, he grew up in the palace with his grandfather, and surely knew something about his grandfather and should have known. But obviously, you know, that's kind of as we move into the next thing. Who wants to admit that the God of this backcountry, Judah, that we've overtaken, is in control over our great empire? And so I can, whereas it's hard for me not to think that he should have had some inkling. At the very least, it is interesting that, you know, what happened to your grandfather for 7 seasons, whatever that means, if it was 7 years or a shorter period of time or a longer period of time, whatever period of time that he was out of control, surely he should have known about that, even if he didn't know about the golden statue, or even if he didn't know about the fiery furnace, you know. But you would think he should have known something of.
To the aged, which Daniel would fall into that category.
Right.
He's partying with people his age.
Right.
Which is exactly what Rehoboam did.
Right. And notice his mother's not in there, you know, right.
Exactly, she's not in there, and
Right.
when she hears, she comes in and says, there is a man, Daniel, who interpreted all of this for your father, referring to Nebuchadnezzar. And so, it just sounds like a repeat.
Right.
of
No,
that
I think
situation.
so. So I think clearly, had he wanted to know, he could have known. But obviously, his pride, I was about to say ubri, but I'll be nice. His pride prevented him from taking that into account at all. Yes, Susan?
Well, I've always thought that he probably, like you said, he grew up in the palace, and he probably heard the stories. But he also probably, you know, as a young man, kind of discounted some of that. Oh yeah, granddad had this real, you know, period of time. Yeah, right, I'm sure. But he was just mentally ill. It wasn't really some God. Do you really believe that story about some God did that to him? Oh no, that's stupid, you know, because we young people, when we're young, we think we know better. Oh, those old people, they've looked at, they actually believe that, you know, and that some God did that. Oh, that's just silly. And so I think he probably had heard the stories and discounted them, or, you know, they had become almost rumor and things whispered about, and so it's like, really, you know, that just doesn't seem real.
Well, and
And so,
if you think about it, he's been groomed
yes,
to be king.
and to have that
And-
ego.
and
he's
right.
been-
You've gotta
he's
have
been
a certain-
prince and brought up with, you know, a privileged lifestyle. So, in some ways, I mean, for me, it's like, like every teenager ever, right? He was not a teenager at this point,
Right.
but still, you know, they all poo-poo what their mom and dad say.
Well, even some 40-year-old men
Right.
don't make the smartest decisions, right? Even some 60-year-old men don't make the smartest decisions from time to time. And so, again, we don't know exactly what he knew or didn't know, but clearly he should have known, and he shouldn't be surprised. And in some ways, it's interesting how he takes it. Obviously, he recognizes the value of what Daniel says to him and accepts it in some way. Now again, he may not have realized what it means your kingdom's going to be taken away from you, even though he had people besieging him outside the gates that very night. He may never have thought this is going to happen tonight. He may have thought, well, 10 years from now, or, but clearly he paid for his pride that evening. Okay. All right. Yes, Susan.
I'm sorry.
That's okay.
I've always thought it's kind of fascinating that he was not given another chance.
Right.
Nebuchadnezzar was.
Right.
Nebuchadnezzar was given that 7 years to wake up and smell the coffee. But Belshazzar was just like, I'm sorry, it's over.
And part of that may have to do with the fact that it just so happens to be close to 70 years, and that's how long the Jews were going to be there, and it was going to take Cyrus, because that's who had already been prophesied was going to be the one who was going to release the Jews.
But at least Nebuchadnezzar had showed some respect
Yeah.
to God and his people, and there's no indication Belshazzar
Ever had, correct.
Well, and Daniel doesn't show Belshazzar the respect that he showed Nebuchadnezzar. With Nebuchadnezzar, he was always hesitant to say these bad things, and he would always give a flowery.
You are the head of gold.
Yes.
You are.
He just says, let your gifts be for yourself.
Right.
No, he doesn't address him in a flowery way at all. He just says, I don't want any of that. And perhaps, I know that when we get older, we get shorter. But he doesn't give he doesn't give Belshazzar the honor.
But it's also because Belshazzar took it one step that his grandfather never did. Although his grandfather took the vessels,
He never used them.
he never used them in a way that they shouldn't have been used. He did. And that may have been the one step too far that said, this is it.
Combined with the fact that his grandfather had been given a chance, and he should have known that.
Right. So there's several reasons why you don't get a second chance. Correct. Okay. All right.
And then the factor of holiness, those vessels meant holiness, and he's defiling holiness.
Right. Yes, Paul.
But also, when we look at Daniel, it's just 12 chapters, and it describes a man that lived about 80 years. These are just the small pictures
Right.
that God gave us, so we can try to say that, no, he never did this. No, he didn't do it in these small examples we have.
Right. It's just like at the end of John 20, where it talks about many other things Jesus did that could be written, and if they were written, we'd have umpteen books to read. But these are written that you may believe. I think that's the same thing here. You're given enough to know God's in control. Whatever has happened up to this point is enough that Belshazzar should have known better, and it's time for a change in rulers. Okay. All right. So in the last 20 minutes we have or so, chapter 6, what happens in chapter 6?
Lanston.
Okay.
Darius.
All right, Darius. So let me do something real quick on Darius. We've mentioned this before, but so again, there's not a lot of history. There is a Darius the Great, but this is not him. There's not a lot of history about this Darius. There are several theories. I'll just explain to you the theories. One is Darius is a title and not necessarily a person's name, and it is possible that this very Darius is one and the same as Cyrus. That is one theory. A second theory is that, again, just like Nabonidus was head of the whole empire but wasn't in Babylon, the same thing happens. Cyrus is conquering all of Babylon, and so is out there dealing with that, and he leaves in his place a man, I'm going to butcher his name, Gubaru, something like that, and that he may be Darius, again, using Darius as a title, not as the guy's name. So a couple of theories, but again, part of this is we don't have full, complete history to verify, but we shouldn't be troubled by the fact it's raising a person that we don't have a lot of information that he exists, because we find out new information all the time. There were years when people thought Pilate was made up until they found a document that mentions Pilate. There were years that they thought the Hittites did not exist until they actually found a lot of information to show the Hittites actually did exist. So it's very possible we'll find some stuff down the road that shows this Darius was a Mede and that Cyrus was a Persian and they were co-rulers at the same time, or that Cyrus was the more important ruler and Darius was the secondary ruler. But what it appears is either they're one and the same person, or while Cyrus is conquering the rest of the empire, Darius is left behind to control Babylon. But it's interesting because it just shows the resilience of Daniel because of God's providence and God's control of what's going on. Because again, new, complete, Jill and I have been watching The West Wing, and they've got a Democrat changing over to Democrat, and even there it's smooth but not that smooth, and then you're like going, but even when they switch over from Democrat to Republican or Republican to Democrat, it's still amazingly smooth, but how many people are in one, how many people are in a Republican administration who then end up in the Democratic administration? Maybe down to the lower level where it doesn't matter, where the bureaucrats just stay the same no matter what. But at the top level, very rarely do you have somebody spanning, But here you got Daniel, and he's one of the top three. It doesn't matter that Belshazzar just told him he's number 3.
As he was promised.
He is still going to be he is one of the top 3. And so again, because God needs him to continue to make points for the nations and for the nation of Israel. And so it's interesting, Darius is even contemplating making him number 1. And what does that cause among all the other satraps and bureaucrats and wannabes? They're jealous. And it's interesting, as they try to figure out how to nail him, as far as being faithful to Darius, he's doing nothing wrong. There is nothing that they can point to him and say, you don't want him in this role. So what do the other satraps come up as a way to trap Daniel? Okay. No, let's create a law that will play to Darius's ego, that he'll sign not realizing the possible consequences, and that attacks Daniel to his very core, his very soul, his very being. And what is the law?
Can't pray.
Cannot pray to anybody but Darius. For how long? 30 days. That's a and it's interesting. Remember, Daniel was not caught up in the bow down to the big statue problem, as far as we know. because Daniel must not have been in Babylon at the time, must have been doing something in his government role elsewhere. But here, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego aren't involved, as far as we know. Maybe they've gone out elsewhere. But Daniel is there, and he's staying there, and it's clearly aimed that they know what kind of person he is. They know he prays. How many times a day? 3. And so as soon as the decree is signed and put into law, what does Daniel do? Goes to his room, windows open to Jerusalem, and he prays. Not trying to hide what he's doing, not, it's kind of like...
But he also wasn't going off the square doing it saying, I'm
Correct.
defying you.
Right.
He's just,
He was going and doing what he'd always did. His prayer life was not necessarily in public. It seemed to be he always went to his room to pray. It was between him and God. But he wasn't trying to hide it either. It wasn't, I'm going to go in this closet and pray, or I can go out of the country for 30 days and come back. I mean, he doesn't try to avoid the conflict.
And he knew the law had been passed.
And he knew the law had been passed. And they made sure that they knew. And of course, they come and find him violating the law. And they go to the king and they say, King, we got somebody who's violating the law. And what's the king's response?
He's distressed.
All right, he's distressed because he all of a sudden realizes the trap he's walked into. And he does not want, and he spends the rest of the day trying to figure out what's the loophole. He obviously didn't have any good lawyers. But he spends the rest of the day trying to find the loophole that will allow him not to throw Daniel into the lion's den. Now, what does he tell Daniel when he throws him into the den?
May your God deliver you.
Okay. He understands Daniel's, again, we don't know what's happened in rule. We don't know how much Darius and Daniel have interacted. We don't know how much Darius knows about the God of the Jews. But he obviously knows enough to know this is important to Daniel. And he says that, and it's very emphatic in verse 16. Your God, whom you serve continually, he will deliver you. That's not how Nebuchadnezzar reacted when he throws Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego into the fiery furnace. But this is really affecting Darius. He doesn't want to do it, but he knows he can't not do it. But he also knows, somehow he knows, that Daniel serves a powerful God, and that his God can, it's not the Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego saying, our God can deliver us, but if he doesn't, it doesn't matter, we're going to obey God. Here, the king actually says, your God will deliver you. And what does the king do overnight?
Fast.
He fasts, he cannot sleep. Right, nothing, and he goes, yes, Dale?
But what did he do before that? He places his signet on the barrier, on the rock, but who else's does he place?
He has all those people who wanted him to get this law in place. He has them put their signet on there as well.
So he's now laying a trap for them.
Okay. Which they don't understand. Right. And the next morning, as soon as it's morning, he rushes to the den to see if maybe just perchance Daniel is still alive, and calls out to Daniel, and Daniel says, the king says, Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to deliver you from the lions? And Daniel says, O king, live forever. My God sent his angel and shut the lions' mouths so that they had not hurt me, because I was found innocent before him. And also, O king, I have done no wrong before you. And so the king is exceedingly glad. The king commands that Daniel be brought up out of the den. And what else does the king command?
He takes the other guys that were tricked him and threw him in
Okay. And not just them,
their whole families.
their wives, their children, anybody who has the taint of being connected with this horrible trick, they get thrown, and before they even land in the den, what happens?
Torn up.
The lions tear them up, and they are dead. Okay. And so Darius writes this decree, verses 25 to 27. To all of you, I make a decree that in every dominion of my kingdom, men must tremble and fear before the God of Daniel. For he is the living God and steadfast forever. His kingdom is the one which shall not be destroyed, and his dominion shall endure to the end. He delivers and rescues, and he works signs and wonders in heaven and on earth, who has delivered Daniel from the power of the lions. So here at the end of Daniel's life, he's still, one, despite being in captivity for 70 years, he's still serving God. His serving God is still causing him issues, but also causing him to be revered. I mean, it says he prospers during the reign of Darius and the reign of Cyrus. And again, you sit there and go, that sounds like that's two different people, and it very well may be, but it can also be read during the reign of Darius, that is the reign of Cyrus. So, but anyway, the point is, and it's not just, and again, as we watch this progression, think about how Nebuchadnezzar talked about God, and compare that to how Darius is talking about God, and see how God has humbled the king of the Medes and the Persians, and how God has ruled throughout this process, and God has come to the end and ruled, and God is still in control, and his people are still in control, and his people, his remnant who still serve him, God is still blessing. Yes, Scott?
I was going to say, this seems to be a further indictment of Belshazzar, because Darius hadn't even been there that long, and he realizes this is a special man. And Daniel, a minister of some sort, an official of some sort in the kingdom. So Belshazzar not knowing who he is shows kind of a willful ignorance or disregard for just what's going on around him.
Okay. So now that we have completed Daniel, I mean, not trying to shut off the discussion of Daniel in the lion's den. If you've got a question or concern or a comment, feel free to make it. But in the last 4 minutes we had, so what's your takeaway from this study of Daniel? How does this apply to you? Why? Because again, this isn't about being able to say, I now can say I have read all of Daniel. I can now say I've been in a class about Daniel. I now put up with Hunter and John for 13 weeks and should get bonus points for having made it through. That's not what this class is about. It never should be. Maybe it should be. I don't know. No, that's not what this class is about, and it is not what it should be. So what is your takeaway from having studied Daniel? How can this help you in your Christian life? And you got 2 minutes.
God's faithful to who's faithful to him.
Okay. So, again, as the women talked about yesterday, Daniel's one of those parts of the cloud of witnesses that because I know he made it through, I can make it through whatever I have to go through. And that God, no matter how much trouble I may go through, God will be faithful to his people. I just need to be one of his people, and I need to be faithful to him. Okay? What else?
Parallels Joseph, same situation.
Okay.
He was in the same position of, helping.
In a
the
foreign
king.
country.
But he endured to the end, and like I said, be part of the remnant. Make sure you're the remnant.
All right.
No matter the circumstance,
Right.
God's in control.
Okay. Right. I mean, again, lots of people didn't survive. Whether they stayed back in Jerusalem or they came, a lot of people didn't go back. There's only a certain small group that survives and thrives and makes it. And you want to be in that small group because you've been faithful to the God who is faithful. Yes, Linda.
The glory is given to God.
Okay. And ultimately, it's about him and not Daniel or Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego or John Parsons or Don Cantrell or Paul Thornton. Yes, Ed.
God can use both the young and the aged.
Okay.
Daniel does it both ends of that spectrum.
Right. So we can, no matter where we are in our lives, God can use us if we will allow ourselves to be used. Although technically, I guess you can sit there and go, God used Belshazzar, God used Nebuchadnezzar. So we're going to be used. The question is, how are we going to be used, and which side are we going to be on? So, right. Correct. Thank y'all. I hope y'all got something out of the class, and keep thinking about Daniel.
afternoon in February. I know it feels like, May or June, because it's like 82 degrees today. But that brings to a close our Bible class quarter, at least for Sunday. So it's a really good time to express the gratitude of our family for all of you who've been covering classes for the last 3 months. We all understand what a sacrifice that is and the preparation involved, whether it's working with the smallest children in class or managing a classroom full of adults. It's a gift that you give to our church family to be willing to do that. And so we're very grateful for that. And we're excited about the new quarter. If you've gotten signed up for classes, sign-up sheets are on the table. Try to take care of that as we go out this evening. Just need to mention to you that there's a devotion for high school kids tonight right afterwards. If you haven't had a chance, commend our young men. They did such a good job at 4:30 today. I'm so grateful for these guys and for their families who support them. It's so encouraging to see them developing and coming along to be worship leaders for our family. So we're going to sing a couple of songs. Jeff is going to lead us, and then we'll have a final prayer, and that will dismiss our gathering for today. Jeff?
Good evening. Hello 2 or 3 times. Walk with thee in lowly paths of service, help me bear the strain of toil, the fret of care. Help me the slow of heart to move by some clear winning word of love. Teach me the wayward feet to stay and guide them in the homeward way. Teach me the patience still with thee, and closer, dear, her company in work that keeps faith sweet and strong, in trust that triumphs over wrong, in hope that sends the shining ray far down the future's broadening way, in peace that only thou canst give, with thee, O Master, let me live. Would you please stand while we sing Walking Alone at Eve? We'll sing the song and then be led in a prayer and be dismissed. Walking alone at eve and viewing the skies afar, bidding the darkness come to welcome each silver star. I have a great delight in the wonderful scenes above. God in his power and might is showing his truth and love. Oh, for a home with God, a place in his courts to rest, sure in a safe abode with Jesus and the blessed. Rest for a weary soul, once redeemed by the Savior's love, where I be pure and whole and live with my God above. Sitting alone at eve and dreaming the hour miles away, watching the shadows falling, now at the close of day. God in his mercy comes, with his word he is drawing near, spreading his love and truth around me and everywhere. Oh, for a home with God, a place in his courts to rest, sure in a safe abode with Jesus and the blessed. Rest, my Lord, yes, meeting him face to face, trusting him as my all, wheresoever my footsteps roam, pleading with him to guide me onto the Spirit's home. Oh, for a home with God, a place in his courts to rest, sure in a safe abode with Jesus and the blessed. Rest for a weary soul, once redeemed by the Savior's love, where I'll be pure and whole and live with my God above.
Bow with me, please. Our Father, Lord in heaven, we're so thankful for this first day of the week that we could come together and to worship you. We pray that all the things that have been said and done here today have been pleasing unto you. Father, we're mindful of those among us who have health issues, and we pray that you would be with them and be with the doctors tending them, that their health may improve. And at this time, we especially pray for the Price family and the loss of Amber. We know that this is going to be a tough time for them, and help us to reach out and support them and show them our love and our concern. Father, as we leave this place and go our separate ways for the week, help us always to carry your word with us. Help us to evaluate the options before us and strive to always be self-reflective in our service to you, that we make the right choices, that we're your children in all that we say and do. In Christ's name we pray.